There is nothing you need to do right now, nothing you need to remember, nothing you need to plan, nothing waiting for your attention on the other side of this moment. You have arrived somewhere quiet, and the only thing asked of you, the only thing, is that you settle a little deeper into wherever you are resting and let yourself be carried. Take a slow breath in through your nose. Hold it gently for just a moment and let it go. Let your shoulders drop with it. Let your jaw soften. Let the space behind your eyes go still. You don't need to do anything with what you hear. You don't need to follow closely or remember details or stay awake for any particular part. The story will move along at its own pace, which is slow and steady and very, very unhurried. And you are welcome to drift in and out of it as naturally as you might drift in and out of a dream. There is a place waiting for you. It exists at the edge of somewhere, at the boundary between water and land, between night and the suggestion of night, in a kind of light that has no intention of changing. The air there is cool and damp and smells of something ancient and mineral, something that has been quietly working at the earth for a very long time. The water there moves slowly, carrying with it a pale, chalky color, like the first thin wash of watercolor across a white page, like the memory of milk, like moonlight diffused through still fog. And there is a boat, and there is a man who has been guiding it for longer than you have been anywhere at all. Let yourself go to him now. Let the rest fall away. There's nothing here but the sound of slow water, and you are already almost there. The first thing you notice is the color of the water. It is not quite white, and not quite gray, and not quite the blue of ordinary rivers. It is something softer than all of those, a pale, muted chalk color, as though the riverbed below has been slowly dissolving into the current for 10,000 years, and has nearly, but not quite, succeeded. The light catches it in long, low ribbons, that particular dusk light that exists here at all hours, a light that does not seem to come from any one direction, but from everywhere at once, from the sky and the water in equal measure, so that the surface of the estuary glows faintly from within, as though the chalk-white current carries something luminous in its depths. You are standing at the edge of the bank. The ground beneath your feet is soft, not muddy, not quite, but yielding in the way of very old earth that has been soaked and dried and soaked again across so many seasons that it no longer bothers to harden completely. There is a fine, pale dust on your shoes, chalk dust carried up from the shallows, and when you breathe in, you can taste it faintly, mineral and cool and clean, the way cold stone smells in a church or a cellar, the smell of something that has been still and patient and undisturbed. Along both banks, as far as you can see in either direction, curving gently away into the soft dusk haze, there is sedge grass, long, pale, narrow-bladed sedge that grows in dense clusters right to the water's edge. And at this hour, which is every hour here, the sedge gives off a faint light of its own. Not a bright light, nothing as insistent as that. A dim, cold luminescence, like the ghost of a candle flame, like the light a glowworm makes when you cup it carefully in your palms. That same soft blue-white pulse, barely there, just enough to suggest itself. The sedge sways in the faintest of breezes, a river breath, the kind that skims low across flat water and does not disturb anything above knee height. And as it sways, the light moves with it, rippling gently along both banks like something breathing. The estuary here is wide and shallow. You can see the far bank. It is not so far, but it is softened by the low mist that sits just above the water's surface, the kind of mist that forms when cold air meets the last warmth rising from the river. That cold, damp air carrying with it the smell of waterlogged willow bark, soft and dark and faintly sweet, and mineral sediment. And somewhere underneath it all, the faint, warm smell of lantern oil. And there is the ferry. It is a flat-bottomed boat, wide and low to the water, built of wood that has been wet and dried so many times, it has taken on the color of the river itself, a weathered gray-brown, the color of old chalk and old water and old patience. The hull sits broad and steady in the shallows, barely moving, though you can see the current pressing gently against its flat side, nudging it the way a sleeping cat nudges a warm hand. There is a rope, a thick, dark rope, wet and heavy, that runs from an iron ring at the ferry's prow, out across the water, suspended just above the surface, connecting this bank to the other in a long, shallow arc. The rope is beaded with water droplets, and as the faint river breeze moves, the droplets tap against the iron ring in a soft, irregular percussion. Tap, 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 tap. A tiny sound, but in the stillness of the estuary, it carries across the water with perfect clarity. And at the back of the ferry, holding the long pole with the ease of someone who has held it for 40 years or more, is Oris. He is an old man, or he has the quality of age about him, that particular stillness that comes not from exhaustion, but from having arrived, after very long practice, at a place of complete economy. He does not move more than he needs to. He does not speak unless the moment requests it. His hands on the pole are unhurried and certain, the way the hands of a person are when the task has been done so many thousands of times that the body has taken complete ownership of it and left the mind entirely free. He is wearing a coat the color of river mud, long and slightly too large, and a hat that was once felt and is now something more complicated, shaped by rain and time into a form that is entirely its own. His face, in the dusk light, is a map of slow crossings, not unhappy, never that, simply well used. He sees you standing at the bank, and he nods, once, the kind of nod that means you are welcome, and also that no explanation is needed, and also that there is no hurry. There is never any hurry here. The ferry will still be here whenever you are ready. You step down from the bank, one step, a soft one, your foot finding the worn wooden edge of the hull, and the boat takes your weight with a low, slow creak, a deep wooden sound like an old house settling in the night, and rocks you gently, once, side to side, before steadying itself again beneath you. You find a place near the prow, where the rope runs through its iron ring, and you settle yourself there, sitting, or nearly sitting, leaning against the low rail, and the cool, damp air comes up from the water and settles around you like a cloth. Oris does not announce the crossing. He does not say it is time. He simply begins, with a motion as natural as breathing, the pole going down into the chalk-colored shallows, finding the silted riverbed, and pushing, and the ferry moves. The sound of the pole against the riverbed is the first thing you learn to listen for, and once you have heard it, you find you cannot stop hearing it. That soft, hollow knock, wood on chalk silt, transmitted up through the shaft of the pole, and into Oris's hands, and into the air around you as a low, resonant tap. Not a sharp sound, not a hard one. A sound with give in it, like a knuckle on a door that is already slightly open, like a spoon resting against the bottom of a very deep bowl. Oris pushes once, and the pole rises, trailing a thread of chalk white water that falls back to the surface in small, distinct drops. Tap, 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 and then the pole goes down again, finds the bottom, and pushes. The current here is gentle, but it has opinions. It nudges the hull sideways, a patient, unhurried pressure, and the boat shifts a degree or two off its line before Oris corrects it, without looking, with a small adjustment of the pole's angle, a motion that has become so deeply automatic that it is less an act of will than a conversation between his hands and the river, a question asked and answered before it is even fully formed. You feel the correction as a soft sway, the hull rocking once, quietly, and then settling again into its slow forward progress. The water hisses against the hull. It is the quietest possible hiss, not the aggressive hiss of fast water or broken water, but the low, continuous sibilance of very shallow, very calm water, parting around a blunt wooden edge and closing again behind it. And the sound is so constant and so soft that after a little while, you stop hearing it as a sound at all and begin to feel it instead, a vibration that travels up through the hull and into the boards beneath you, and into the soles of your feet, and up through your spine, and comes to rest somewhere in the center of your chest, where it simply stays, a small, steady hum. You look out over the side of the hull at the chalk white water passing below. In the shallow places, you can see the riverbed, pale and smooth, chalk silt layered in soft ridges, with occasional stones, dark and smooth, settled into the sediment as though they have been resting there for a very long time and have no intention of moving. The light passes through the water at the edges of the hull and breaks into long, pale, wavering lines across the bottom, shifting and reforming with each small movement of the surface. And you watch these lines for a while. They are the most patient kind of pattern, never quite the same twice, never quite different enough to demand attention, simply moving, simply there, quietly. The sedge grass along the near bank has fallen behind now. You are in the middle of the crossing, or near the middle, and the banks are equidistant on either side. Soft, dark shapes, fringed with that faint blue-white luminescence, and the water between you and them is pale and open and still, except for the ferry's quiet wake spreading in slow, low ridges behind you. Oris has not spoken yet. He does not feel the need to, and you find, settling into the boat's rhythm, that you do not feel the need to hear him. The pole goes down, finds the bottom with its soft, hollow knock, pushes, rises, and the water falls from it in drops. Tap, 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 tap. And this is enough. This is a great deal. A sound comes across the flat water from somewhere on the far bank, low and long and unhurried, a single note, held for a moment and then released, the call of a night heron, distant and somehow completely located in the gray dusk air, a sound that seems to rise from the mist itself. Oris hears it, and something in his face settles a fraction more, the corners of his mouth, the set of his shoulders, as though the heron's call is something familiar and kind, something he has been hearing for so long that it has become simply part of the texture of the crossing, like the creak of the hull and the chalk water hiss and the tap of the rope against the iron ring. The heron does not call again for a while. The silence that follows its single note is a particular quality of silence, the kind that exists after a sound has finished and left its shape behind in the air, and you stay inside that shape for a while, resting. After some time, and time here does not press, it simply passes, like water through an open hand. Oris shifts his weight, and the ferry slows, not stopping, but settling into a gentler drift, and he looks out over the starboard side of the hull with the patient attention of someone who has just noticed something he has been watching for years. You follow his gaze. Just below the surface of the chalk white water, perhaps 3 boat lengths ahead, and slightly to the right of the ferry's course, there's something that does not quite look like the riverbed. A shape, low, curved, pale, that becomes, as you draw closer, clearly stone. An arch of some kind, old and partial and submerged, made of pale limestone blocks that the river has been slowly dissolving for perhaps more years than anyone has counted. The arch catches the dusk light differently than the water around it. The light bends around its curves and pools in the hollow of it. And in that pooled light, something happens. The color shifts briefly from the pale chalk white of the estuary to something warmer. A faint, low amber, like the last light in a lantern when the oil is nearly gone. Just for a moment, the stone arch glows amber in the pale water. Just for a moment. And then the ferry has passed it, and the chalk white light closes back over it, and it is gone beneath the surface again. Submerged and patient, Oris watches it pass without comment, but with a quality of regard that tells you he has seen this 10,000 times and finds it as worth attending to as he did the first. This is one of his landmarks, not marked on any map, not shared as a curiosity with any particular cargo, simply known to him privately and completely, the way you know the sounds your own house makes at night. A personal geography, assembled over decades of crossings on this same arc of pale water. There are others. He points. A small gesture, a single extended finger, unhurried, toward a cluster of pale river reeds on the near bank, set slightly apart from the sedge grass, their flat, wide blades catching the dim luminescence differently, reflecting it rather than producing it, so that they shine like dull mirrors in the blue-gray dusk. These reeds, Oris knows, have been moving. He has watched them move, year by year, a hand's breadth at a time, gradually, in the patient way of things that grow in moving water, dislodged from their original anchor by seasons of flooding and settling, slowly walking downstream with the current's long, long patience. When he first came to this crossing, these reeds grew 3 ferry lengths upstream of where they float now. He has watched their migration for 40 years, and they have moved a total distance he could cover in a few minutes walking, and they will continue long after he has finished his last crossing, and the thought does not sadden him. Or rather, he has made a kind of peace with it so thorough that peace is no longer the right word. It is simply true. The reeds move. The river carries them. This is a comfort. You watch the reeds as the ferry passes. Their reflective blades catch the hull's wake and tremble for a moment, sending the dim light shifting in all directions, and then settle back into their patient stance. The water here in the middle of the crossing is slightly deeper, and you can feel it in the quality of Oris's push, the pole going down further before it finds the bottom, the pause before it catches being a half breath longer, the push when it comes being slower and more deliberate, and the liftoff sending a longer thread of chalk white water up the shaft before the drops fall back. Tap, 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 tap. The rhythm shifting just slightly, like a familiar piece of music moving through a slower passage. The cold, damp air is heavier out here in the middle of the estuary. It carries the mineral smell more fully here, chalk and silt and cold water, and something older underneath, something deep in the riverbed, the smell of old stone, of things that have been submerged so long they have taken on the character of the water itself. It carries, too, the smell of waterlogged willow bark from somewhere not far off, that soft, dark sweetness, and the lantern oil from the small lamp that hangs from the ferry's single low post at the prow, where it casts a circle of warm gold light across the hull's boards, barely reaching the water's edge. The cold river mist mingles with the lantern oil's warm smell, and the combination is complex and entirely itself, and somehow deeply calming, the way the smell of a fire in a cold room is calming, the way the smell of old books in a quiet library is calming, a smell that says, there's nothing urgent here. The rope hisses through its iron ring as the current presses the hull sideways, and the rope takes up the tension. It is a soft sound, that hiss, a slow drag of wet fiber through wet iron, followed by the soft release when Oris corrects course and the tension eases, a sound with a particular intimacy to it, as though the ferry is breathing, taking a breath in as the rope tightens and letting it go as it loosens. You have not noticed, until now, how much of this crossing is made of breath. Oris's slow and steady breathing, the river's long exhalation against the hull, the rope's slow draw and release, the Heron's single note, and its long-held after silence. Everything breathing, everything measured in slow breath. After a while, after some unmeasured collection of pole strokes and droplet taps and soft hull creaks, you become aware of a sound ahead of you, very faint, at the edge of hearing, a soft, continuous brushing sound, like a hand drawn very gently across a smooth surface, or like rain so fine it barely counts, or like, and then you understand it as the ferry draws closer, like the long, trailing branches of a willow tree moving across the ferry's roof. The willow grows on a small, low island of raised sediment in the middle of the estuary, barely large enough to qualify as land, a platform of pale chalk silt and dark soil, perhaps as wide as 3 or 4 rowing boats laid end to end, grown over entirely with grass and low reeds, and, at its highest point, the willow. The willow is very old. Its trunk has the texture of water-worn rope, twisted and deeply furrowed, the bark pale and silver gray, and its branches go outward and then down in the long, patient cascade that willows make, trailing their fine, narrow-leaved fronds nearly to the water on all sides, so that the tree exists inside a kind of loose green curtain of its own making. The ferry's course passes directly beneath the willow's outermost branches. It always has, for all of Oris's 40 years of crossings. And as the hull drifts under the canopy's edge, the trailing fronds sweep across the low roof of the ferry's small covered section with a sound like a whispered word, like a breath across a page, soft and continuous, and then done. Oris speaks then. For the first time since the crossing began, his voice enters the air, low and unhurried, the voice of someone who has been keeping his own company so long that speech has become a considered act, each word arriving because it is the right word, rather than because something needs to be filled. He does not say anything complicated. He simply says the Willow's name. Not a name you recognize from any map, a private name, a name between the ferryman and the tree. And his tone is the tone of greeting a neighbor you have seen every morning for 40 years. The small, warm, entirely unsentimental acknowledgement that says, "You are still here, and so am I, and this is good." The willow's branches trail across the hull once more as the ferry passes beneath the last edge of the canopy. And then the tree is behind you, its trailing fronds settling back to stillness in the flat air. And the only sound again is the chalk water hiss, and the hollow knock of the pole, and the distant, occasional tap of the rope against its ring. You look back at the willow as the ferry carries you away from it. In the dim bioluminescent light from the sedge grass on the distant banks, the tree is a soft gray-green shape at the center of the pale water, its long fronds hanging still now that you have passed, and it has the quality of something that has never been in a hurry and never will be, something so thoroughly rooted in its own patience that time passes around it rather than through it. You turn back to the water ahead. The far bank is closer now. You can see the sedge grass there more clearly, the same long, pale blades, the same faint, cold luminescence. But on this side, the bank rises a little higher, and behind the sedge, there are low willows and alders growing close together, the trunks dark with moisture, their roots going down into the chalk-wet earth, and beyond them, the suggestion of a meadow, pale and flat and very still. But you are not near the bank yet. The crossing continues. Oris settles into a rhythm so deep that you have stopped hearing the pole as a series of separate sounds and have begun hearing it as a single, continuous thing. The way you stop hearing rain on a roof after a while and simply feel it as a presence, a gentle texture in the air. The pole goes down, finds the riverbed, pushes, the hull moves forward with its slow creak. The pole rises, the water falls from it in drops. Tap, tap, tap. The current nudges the hull sideways. Oris corrects with a small adjustment. The rope hisses softly and releases. And then the pole goes down again. And this is the crossing. And the crossing has always been this, and will be this again. Crossing after crossing, each one indistinguishable from the last. And Oris has told you without words that this is the greatest comfort the world has ever offered. You breathe in the cold mineral air. The chalk dust smell is very present now. Out here in the deeper middle, where the pole must work harder and brings more sediment up with each lift. You can feel it at the back of your throat. Clean and slightly alkaline, not unpleasant. The taste of old earth and old water. The taste of something that has been patient for a very long time. A second call from the night heron, closer now, or perhaps clearer, the flat water carrying the sound with less distortion. One long, low note, unornamented, simply itself, and then silence. Oris does not look in the direction of the sound. He has heard it so many times that it has become part of his body's inventory of the crossing, registered and noted without requiring any outward response. The way you register the sound of your own heartbeat without turning to look for it. The droplets from the pole tap the water's surface, tap, 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 and ripple out in small, perfect circles that cross and interfere with one another and die out slowly at the hull's edge. You watch these circles for a while. They are very small and very brief and entirely complete. Each one expands from its point of origin, clear and orderly, until it reaches the limit of its energy and subsides. And then there is another and another in the same spot, overlapping, crossing, completing. The lantern at the prow sends a small, warm reflection across the chalk-white water below, a long smear of gold in the pale gray surface, moving with the hull, carried forward at exactly the ferry's pace. You watch it too, that traveling smear of warm light in the cold-colored water, and there is something in the juxtaposition that is deeply restful, the warm and the cold held together without conflict, the gold light floating on the pale chalk water as easily and naturally as anything floats. At some point, you cannot say when exactly, because time here is not that kind of thing. Oris pauses. Not a stop. The pole rests upright in his hands, its lower end lifted clear of the water, and the ferry glides on its own momentum for a few strokes, the hull making its soft hiss against the current, the wake spreading behind in low ridges, the lantern flame steady in the still air. Oris looks along the surface of the water to the north, upstream, or what feels like upstream, toward the long curve of the estuary, where it bends out of sight into the dusk haze. You look too. There's nothing there that you can identify as a thing. No particular object, no landmark, just the pale water running its long, slow curve, the luminescent sedge along both banks sending its faint light up into the mist resting low and soft above the surface in long, undulating layers. But Oris is seeing something, or attending to something. The quality of his attention, the quality of his stillness, suggests that there's something here that rewards the looking. And after a moment, you begin to see it too. Or not see, exactly. Sense. The way the mist moves, in very slow, very gentle rotations, turning so slowly that calling it movement at all feels like an overstatement. More like the mist simply being the mist, being moisture and cold air, following the long, long patience of the water underneath it. The way the sedge light from the two banks reaches out across the water and, not quite meeting in the middle, leaves a thin stripe of deeper dimness down the center of the estuary, a darkness that is not dark, a dimming that is not an absence of light, but something subtler than that, a place where the light rests differently. Oris watches this for a while, and then, with the same unhurried economy, he lowers the pole, finds the riverbed, knock, and pushes, and the ferry moves forward again, carrying you gently further across. You do not know how many crossings Oris has made. He knows, or he has a number somewhere, accumulated over 40 years of daily passages. The count kept in the way a person keeps the count of something that matters without needing to record it anywhere, carried in the body rather than the mind. The number is very large, large enough that each individual crossing has been dissolved into the general fact of crossing, the way individual days dissolve into the general fact of a life lived in one place, the particular details blurred by repetition into a continuous texture, a sensation rather than a sequence. But the details have not disappeared. This is what you have understood, watching Oris. The repetition has not made the crossing ordinary in the diminishing sense of that word. It has made it ordinary in the richer sense, the sense of something that has been absorbed so completely into everyday practice that it has become part of how the person is made. The submerged stone arch with its brief amber light, the migrating reeds, the willow's name, the particular sound the pole makes when the riverbed is chalk silt versus when it finds a buried stone, the way the heron's call sounds different on still nights versus nights when even a small breeze is moving. Oris carries all of this, not as a collection of memories, but as a single continuous knowing, the crossing as a living thing, breathing and known, as familiar as the inside of his own hands. He pulls again, and the hull moves forward. The chalk water hisses. The rope taps against the iron ring. Tap, tap, tap. The cold, damp air brings a new note now, or a note you have not distinguished until now. The smell of wet alder bark and dark soil from the approaching bank. That deep, moist earth smell. The smell of roots and slow water, and the particular richness of soil that has been saturated and patient for a very long time. It mingles with the chalk mineral smell of the water, and the lantern oil's warm thread, and the waterlogged willow bark sweetness, and the combination settles around you like something laid gently over the shoulders, a weight that is not heavy, a covering that does not confine, simply a presence, complete and kind. The ferry hull creaks, long and low, as the current shifts slightly and the hull adjusts its trim. The sound travels up through the boards beneath you, and you feel it as much as hear it. That low, wooden voice of the hull saying what it always says, that it is carrying you. And it has been doing this for a very long time, and it is entirely capable of continuing. You become aware that the far bank is now closer than the near bank. You have passed the middle of the crossing, somewhere back there, while you were watching the droplet circles, or the lantern light, or Oris's still attention on the mist, and you are now in the second half of the passage, moving toward the other shore with the same slow, steady, pole stroke certainty that has brought you this far. The sedge grass on the far bank is brighter here, or your eyes have adjusted to the dusk, and the faint luminescence has more to work with now, and you can see individual clusters of it, each cluster slightly different from the others in height and density, each sending its cold blue-white light up through the mist in its own particular way. There is one cluster larger than the others, a dense mass of sedge right at the water's edge, and its light is correspondingly stronger. Not bright, never bright, but a fuller glow, a more sustained pulse in the rhythmic breathing of the bank's light. Oris navigates toward the left of this larger cluster, not because he needs to reference it. His course is set, as it has always been, but because the approach line happens to pass near it. And as the ferry draws closer, you can see the individual blades of the sedge more clearly, each one slender and pale, glowing along its length with that cold, diffuse light, bending slightly at the tip where the day's condensation has gathered in small drops that catch and scatter the bioluminescence in tiny, pointillist sparks. The water here is shallowing again, and Oris's pole finds the riverbed more readily now, the knock coming earlier in the pole's descent, the push requiring slightly less effort, the droplets falling back a shorter distance. The hull's hiss changes character slightly in the shallows, becoming softer and more continuous, less the sound of water parting around an obstacle, and more the sound of the hull simply resting on the surface, floating in the truest sense, barely displacing the chalk-white current. There is something about the shallows that invites a particular quality of attention. The riverbed is visible here. You can see the pale chalk silt clearly, smooth and finely ridged by the current's patient work, and the occasional dark stone, and here and there the delicate impression of where something small has moved across the bottom. The precise, fragile trails of water insects, the soft disturbances where a wading bird has set its foot. The world of the riverbed is very small and very detailed, and the chalk-white water is clear enough that you can attend to it from the hull of the ferry without effort, simply looking down, watching the patterns that the current and the sediment have made together over a long time. A small fish, pale as the water itself, barely a shadow, moves in a quick drift along the bottom and then holds still, fins barely working, almost perfectly invisible against the chalk silt. It holds there for a long breath, then another. Then it drifts again, further along, and you lose it against the patterned bottom. The pole goes down, finds the silt, knock, pushes, and the ferry moves forward its slow boat length. The rope drags and releases through the iron ring. Shh, release. The hull creaks, settling. Oris navigates the last stretch of crossing with the same unhurried economy that has governed the entire passage. There is no acceleration toward the bank, no gathering of purpose or effort. The pace is the pace. The pole strokes are the pole strokes. The bank approaches at exactly the speed it has always approached, which is the speed of a thing that cannot be hurried and does not need to be. The ferry touches the far bank with the softest of nudges, a gentle contact, hull to earth, so mild that you feel it less as an arrival than as a settling. The boat simply deciding to rest here for a while, against this particular bank, at this particular point in the pale sedge grass. Oris sets the pole at rest in its notch in the hull side, and reaches out to a low post set in the bank. A dark wooden post worn smooth by 40 years of rope catches, and loops the mooring rope around it with a motion so practiced it does not even require him to look. The ferry rests. The current continues to press gently against its side, the hull accepting this pressure and yielding to the rope's slight tension, rocking in a very slow, very small arc, forward and back, forward and back. A movement like the movement of a hammock in a light breeze, like the rocking of a cradle, like the slow, rhythmic motion that the body carries from the womb into life and never quite forgets. On this bank, there is a low structure set back from the water's edge, low and broad, built of the same weathered chalk pale stone as the submerged arch out there in the middle of the estuary, roofed with old reed thatch, its single window offering a warm amber rectangle of lantern light into the blue-gray dusk. This is where Oris pauses between crossings. Not a home exactly, not a place of residence, more a resting place, a room whose relationship to the crossing is the same as a breath's relationship to the breathing, the pause that makes the continuation possible. You follow him from the ferry to the door, your feet finding the soft chalk earth of the bank, the pale sedge grass touching the backs of your hands as you pass through it. The bioluminescent blades cool and faintly damp against your skin, their light barely there, just enough. Inside, the air is warmer, not warm, Not the warmth of summer or fire warmth exactly, but the warmth of a stone room that has been gently heated for a very long time and retains its heat the way old stone does, slowly and generously. There's a small iron stove against the far wall, its firebox door cracked to show a low, steady glow, burning river driftwood, the close, sweet smoke of waterlogged alder and willow, a smell that is already everywhere in the air outside, but inside becomes its richest self, warm and slightly resinous, deeply at rest. There's a table, low and plain, 2 chairs, a lantern on the table casting its amber circle, a kettle on the stove, not boiling, but warm, its sides ticking softly with the small expansions and contractions of heated metal, a tiny, irregular sound, companionable in the quiet. Oris hangs his coat on the hook by the door and settles into the nearer chair with the ease of a person whose body and chair have shaped themselves to each other over many years of such settling. He does not make a show of resting. He simply rests, his hands loose on the table, his eyes moving to the window and the dim blue glow of the sedge beyond the glass, his breathing slow and entirely unlabored. You settle into the other chair. The wood beneath you is smooth and worn and slightly warm from the stove, and the small creaks it makes as you settle your weight are soft and final sounding, the sound of things finding their arrangement for the night. After some time, Oris rises and lifts the kettle from the stove, and in a few unhurried movements, a cloth laid out, 2 cups set down, the kettle tilted with one practiced hand. There's tea, not a ceremony, not presented as such, simply tea, in 2 plain cups, pale as the estuary water, faintly steaming in the amber lantern light. You lift the cup. The warmth of it passes through your palms and up through your wrists and along your forearms, a slow warmth, the kind that does not insist but simply settles. The tea is plain and slightly mineral. You are not surprised, with a faint herbal sweetness underneath, something harvested from the riverbank, dried and kept for this exact purpose. You drink slowly. Each sip is warm and quiet. The cup returns to the table, a small sound of clay on wood, and the steam continues to rise in a thin, unhurried thread from the surface. The kettle ticks on the stove. The stove glow shifts very slightly as the wood inside settles a fraction. The lantern flame breathes, just barely, just the smallest tremble at its tip, and the amber light shifts across the ceiling and the walls and goes still again. Outside, the Chalk Estuary continues its long, unhurried passage. You can hear it from here, the faintest hiss of water, so familiar now that it has become part of the room's texture rather than a sound from outside, as much at home inside your hearing as the kettle's ticking and the stove's low glow. And somewhere out across the flat water, the night heron calls once more. Far now, very far, its single note arriving at the window as the finest possible thread of sound, barely there, simply acknowledging itself and then releasing. Oris wraps his hands around his cup and looks at the window for a while. You do not need to know what he is thinking, or looking at, or attending to with that particular quality of quiet that is his natural climate. It is enough to be in the same room with it, enough to let his stillness extend into the air around him and into the air around you, and settle across your shoulders like the warmth of the stone walls, like the smell of burning alderwood, like the chalk mineral air coming in under the door. The tea cools in the cup. You drink the last of it slowly, the warmth in your hands subsiding gradually, the cup lighter now, And when you set it down, the small sound of clay on wood is the softest of full stops, completing a sentence whose beginning you have already forgotten, because it was never the point. The lantern oil burns its slow, steady burn. The flame is very still now, barely moving, as though the air inside the room has settled into a complete and mutual calm, nothing pressing against it from any direction, nothing asking it to lean or tremble or change. The amber circle it casts on the table is entirely steady, and you rest your eyes on it for a while. Just the amber circle, just the warmth of it, just the sound of the kettle cooling on the stove, ticking softly as it goes. At some point, you become aware that you are very comfortable. Not comfortable in the deliberate way, not comfortable because you have arranged yourself, adjusted a pillow, found a better position, but comfortable in the effortless way, the way you become when you stop noticing your own body because it has found exactly the balance it was looking for and no longer needs to report in. Your hands are at rest. Your shoulders have released to somewhere below where they have been all day. The space behind your eyes has gone soft and wide, the way it does in the last minutes before sleep, when the thoughts begin to lose their edges and drift sideways rather than forward, and following them is no longer something you could do even if you wanted to. The stove ticks. The estuary hisses, very faint now, at the edge of hearing. You are back on the water. This happens without transition, without announcement. One moment you are in the warm stone room with the amber lantern light and the cooling teacup, and the next you are simply on the ferry again. The hull beneath you, the chalk white water below, the cold, damp air around you, and Oris at the back with his pole, beginning the return crossing. You have not arranged for this. The crossing has simply resumed, the way a river simply flows, not because anything has decided to make it flow, but because flowing is what it is. The pole goes down, knock, push. The hull moves forward, slow and broad and certain. The chalk water hisses. The rope taps against the ring. Tap, tap. The sedge grass on the receding bank breathes its cold blue-white light into the mist. The mist moves in its imperceptible rotations above the pale water. The lantern at the prow sends its small gold reflection sliding across the chalk current, traveling with you, steady. Everything is the same. Everything will be the same on the next crossing, and the one after that, and the one after that. Oris knows this with a completeness that has long since passed through every stage of possible feeling about it. The novelty, the comfort, the rare momentary tedium, the deeper comfort that replaced it, and arrived at something beyond all of those, something that has no name because it does not need one, because it is simply the fact of a life in full agreement with itself. The pole goes down. Knock. Push. The willow is ahead. You can hear the trailing fronds before you reach them. That soft brushing sound, a sound like a whispered word, like a breath across a page. And then the fronds are sliding across the hull's roof, soft and continuous. And the smell of the willow comes down with them. Warm green leaf and wet bark and old wood and something else. Something entirely the willow's own. And Oris says the willow's name again, in that same quiet tone, that same small, warm acknowledgement. And the fronds release, and the tree is behind you again, resting in the pale water on its chalk silt island, trailing its fronds in their patient green curtain, unhurried, rooted, entirely itself. water is darker out here in the middle now, or the mist is lower, or your eyes have softened sufficiently that the edges of things, the far bank, the near bank, the horizon where the pale water meets the pale sky, have become difficult to locate precisely, have become gradients rather than lines. And this makes the estuary feel very large, very open, the way a room feels large when you close your eyes in it. The chalk white water catches what light there is and gives it back gently. The lantern's gold thread floats on the surface. The sedge light pulses softly on the distant banks, barely visible through the mist. The night heron is quiet now. The heron has gone to wherever herons go in this permanent dusk, to stand in the shallows on the far side of the estuary with the patience only long-legged birds possess, or to rest in the alders with its neck folded and its eyes half closed. The silence it has left behind is complete and fine-grained, the finest quality of silence, the kind that has no gaps in it. The pole goes down. Knock. Push. The hull moves. You are not quite awake. You notice this with a calmness that belongs to the place. No alarm in it, no urgency to change anything one way or the other. Simply the noticing, the way you might notice that the light has changed without needing to say anything about it. The crossing continues. The chalk water hisses below you, very soft. The rope taps. Tap, tap, tap. The hull creaks once and settles. The cold mineral air is still around you. The smell of waterlogged willow bark. The lantern oil. The chalk. Oris moves at the back of the ferry, slow and certain, and the pole finds the riverbed. Knock and pushes, and the hull moves forward its slow boat length, and the water closes behind you in its low, spreading ridges. The sedge grass pulses, faint, cold and faint and blue-white and very far away on both banks, receding into the mist. The amber light from the submerged stone arch rises briefly through the chalk-white water, holds, and is gone. The migrating reeds stand at the bank, unhurried in their long downstream journey. The willow rests on its pale island. The heron is somewhere in the gray dusk air, holding its long practiced stillness. Oris poles the ferry across the pale Chalk Estuary for the 10,000th time, or the 10,001st, and his body carries the crossing without asking anything of his mind. And his mind is simply here, in the cool air, in the dim light, in the hiss of water, and the knock of wood on chalk, and the tap-tap of droplets on a rope, in the slow rocking of the hull as the current nudges it and he corrects, and the rope draws and releases, and the water carries him, and the crossing simply continues. The hull rocks, very gently, forward and back, forward and back. The water hisses, very soft, very far. The pole goes down, knock, push, and the ferry moves, forward, slow, into the pale water, into the chalk white light, into the mist and the sedge glow and the cold, mineral, patient air, into the crossing, which has always been, which will always be. The water carries you, slow and still and easy. Let go, let go. The chalk water moves beneath you, and you are already somewhere very quiet.